So let's get started. When I am drawing, I think of the size first. And so for something like this, for a thigh piece, I'm just going to draw a general shape to illustrate sort of the available workspace that we have. So this won't necessarily be the entire size of the design, but having an idea contextually of what we're working with is going to be very helpful. So it's just going to be a very simple sort of shape to represent the space on our thigh that we're working with. Okay, so from that, now we have sort of a space to be working within. And I'm going to start just very, very roughly outlining kind of the shape. Don't spend too much time on details. You're going to want to just very kind of generally outline the general shapes that we're going to be working with. It's okay to use reference photos, but again, it's about capturing an idea first and foremost. You can go in and you can refine the shapes later. You can go in and you can make changes as necessary, but it's about capturing the idea. Okay, so general heart shape, you've got some veins going here. So she also wanted to include some greenery, some living things coming out of maybe these ventricles here. So the idea is that there's a heart that is kind of wooden and dry and dead and not working too well, but with new growth sort of coming out. So you have a lot of sort of ideas that are included in that, like rebirth and new life coming out of painful situations. Yeah, there's a lot of different sort of things you can do with that. So we're gonna do some leaves. We're gonna make some shapes that we can add flowers into later. Now, things to consider when you're drawing. You don't want things to be too close together. Be conscious of the relationship of the lines, making sure that you're not putting a whole lot of detailed things right next to each other, because if they're too close, they'll start to bleed into each other in a tattoo. So sometimes larger and more simple shapes are better at first. And again, it's about getting the flow and the shape rather than the details at this point. Just a note of consideration, it's totally fine to use reference images if you don't know what a heart looks like, if you need to look it up what a heart looks like, if you need to trace elements of it. Oftentimes I'll go in and I'll do a Google search of just things that I need to remind myself what they look like. This isn't a drawing competition. This is about encapsulating an idea. It's about capturing an idea and turning it into a visual. So if you need a little bit of assistance for that, that's totally fine. So we have some foliage going on up here. Now, the other element that we wanted to include was the wooden aspect. So on the underside of the heart here, I had the idea of making it look sort of like an old barn texture or like old weathered wood to bring out that idea of something that's sort of old and decrepit. So there's a couple different ways you could do that. You could make the whole heart kind of look like a piece of wood, but the idea that I had was kind of mimic the texture that you would see on an old barn if it was sort of twisted and like skewed around a circular shape. So there's a couple different ways you could do that, but again, you want to make sure that you don't get too detailed. We have a fairly large surface to work on, but still we want to make sure that we're not trying to cram too many details into this. So we're going to add in some wood blocks or boards here. And oftentimes with boards, you'll have them overlapping, so they'll be this way and then kind of moving off to the side. It kind of moves back and forth. And for this, it's okay for them to be a little bit sort of rough and not perfect looking, because that's actually kind of the point, is that they're a little bit weathered and a little bit sort of not perfect and not very pretty. So they're sort of going to be kind of off at angles and sticking out, and maybe some that are sort of broken looking or weathered along those lines, like that, kind of sticking out. And again, we can add more details in later. This is just about sort of capturing the sketch, the idea. And then we'll kind of fade it in. We don't want it to necessarily cover the whole thing, so we're going to just sort of fade it into the rest of the heart. So some of the heart can be looking kind of boarded up, if you will. Okay. And that could be good. Just as a starting point, you have enough detail to sort of get the idea across. You don't have too much detail. It's still just sort of encapsulating the idea. And then this is what I would send to the client. This is what you would send. You would take a picture of this, you would send it to them, you would look at it if it's for you. You kind of have an idea of what you're thinking. At this point, the client would be able to look this over and give you feedback about this. I like the flowers, I don't like the flowers. You could add more details if you wanted, but at this point it's more about the shape and the idea. So this is enough for them to sort of get the gist of what you're thinking for the design. Okay? So this would be the sketch phase of the tattoo design. So in the sketching process, you'll see that you start to capture the emotion and the meaning behind it. So even with a sketch, you can start to see things taking shape and taking form. And what you're trying to do is capture the shape and the general flow of the tattoo in a very simplistic form. So rather than getting hung up on whether this is exactly what these boards look like, for example, or whether these flowers are going to be roses or whether they're going to be daffodils or daisies or whatever. It's about kind of capturing the placement and the flow of the tattoo. So you have the heart, you have the wooden elements, you have the flowers and the growth happening. These can all be edited or changed or tweaked, refined later on in the process. But taking time, especially at the beginning, to not focus on the details, focusing on the big picture, focusing on the shape. This is the area that we have to work with. This is the idea that we want to work with. I might spend time to draw a couple different versions of something. I may draw the heart in a different position. I may add the wood in a different way. I may try to incorporate the greenery in a different sort of relation to the heart. It doesn't hurt to draw several options to come up with the best possible outcome.